What is the most complicated way you've seen a smart person solve a simple problem? Story 1. Saw some science majors try to cut a slab of wood to fit in between slot A and slot B for a custom project they were building. They drew a diagram, did the math on paper, and measured it out on the wood. Cut the wood. Wood was too long. They did it again using more accurate decimals. By try number 3, they asked my dad, he did woodworking as a hobby on the side, was well experienced, since they were on their last piece of wood and didn't want to waste it. They spent 25 minutes and looked ready to rip their hair out. My dad took the new piece, held it in between slot A and B, and then marked with a pencil. He gave it back to them and said, "Cut on these marked lines." My dad didn't even need to have time to blink. Piece of wood fit just fine. That's so funny. People with all these degrees and stuff often forget how to keep things simple. They're just so stuck in their minds, they complicate everything needlessly. Your dad showed them how to do it right. Story 2. A former neighbor had an upright freezer in his basement that was not self-defrosting. Twice per year, he'd asked to store his frozen food in our frost-free freezer while he defrosted. The guy's method was to unplug his freezer, leave the door open for several days, and let the water run all over his basement floor, creating a mess that lasted for days. Finally, I suggested that he store his frozen food in insulated bags, then use a hairdryer on the inside, unscrewing the drain plug in the rear of the unit, allowing the melting water to flow into a catch basin. Voila! Problem solved. The entire thing is under 1 hour instead of several days. I just want to say, I hope that your neighbor was as kind with favors. A good neighbor, even a dumb one, is priceless. Story 3. Worked with a guy at AutoZone that had 2 sets of kids and 2 sets of child support payments. He worked 40 hours with us and then 30 to 40 at a grocery store, just killing himself to survive. Turns out that he was like 9 hours away from a degree he had begun a decade earlier, and he just randomly mentioned it to a coworker while they were stocking things. The managers at both stores knew his situation and worked his schedule together to get him the hours he needed. They started a tuition fund that anyone could donate to, and both sat him down to say he needed to finish his school. The school put together a prereq class for him, which he made an A in, and off he went one class at a time. 1 year later, he walked the stage with a marketing degree and turned his whole life around at 41 or 42. Story 4. This is an oldie, but I went to a university known for its engineering program. Back in those days, the best internet connection available on campus was via a 19200 baud modem built into the phones. You know, the kind that sit on a table or desk. In most cases, you'd have to buy a serial cable to connect to your PC. 9-pin female on one end going to the PC and 25-pin male on the other going into the phone. Most folks could handle it. Guy across the hall comes over to ask for help. Him and his roommate both studying to be engineers. I go over to find his roommate with a pair of pliers, trying to reshape the phone side of his cable so that it would fit on the phone. For those unaware, these things are 2 rows of pins, 13 on top, 12 on the bottom, so it's slightly trapezoidal. He literally was trying to plug it in upside down and was going to bend the plug end to make it fit. Engineers love to solve puzzles and often make things more complicated than they should be. I think they just enjoy it more if it's complex. Story 5. I didn't witness it personally, but the story has always made me laugh. My dad worked as basically a stationary engineer for a large automotive factory. He repaired the machines that made the smelting, iron pouring processes possible. Anyway, for whatever reason, the plant changed some policy and brought in these huge tanks of, I think, hydrochloric acid, and my dad and the guys he worked with had to take a class on what happened if there was a leak, like how to put on this hazmat suit and respirator, etc. So they give a test. Dad writes down 1 sentence and hands it to the instructor. Check direction of wind and run. Story 6. This isn't the most complicated. I wouldn't remember even if it was. But my boyfriend's real smart. Basically, I was trying to explain to him why the body sweats when it has a fever, and my language was fairly simple, as science isn't exactly my specialty. However, he's super talented at it, so he was just like, "Do you know why that is?" After I explained my reasoning, I was just like, "Yeah, sort of." He proceeded to basically just restate my points with more science and fancy wording, and then called me wrong. Like, what? Sounds to me like he was showing off. Being more educated and brainy than you does not make him superior to anyone else. He obviously has a high opinion of himself and not of you, I dare say. Story 7. My dad is pretty old school, and although he can take most mechanical things apart and put them back together by memory, he just doesn't do computers. Anyway, he has a 6 or 7-year-old iPad that allows him to go on Facebook and shout into the void as much as he likes. He recently created a post that he was very proud of and proceeded to try and share it with everyone he knew. He posted the link to his Facebook profile on my page, sent 2 separate DMs to me, and then reshared his own post on his Lifeline, for example. One of his friends who does not have Facebook wanted to see this amazing post. And so my dad had my mom use her iPhone X to take a picture of his iPad screen, email the JPEG to my dad, and then he forwarded the email to his friend. I felt bad I hadn't taught him how to screenshot anything. Story 8. My mom and I were making cupcakes for Super Bowl. We wanted to loosely make them football themed, so we decided to make the cake itself green, grass, and the frosting brown, the football. We bought vanilla cake and icing and food coloring. We made the cake and added a bit of green food coloring. Then, as we mixed the brown into the vanilla icing, we had to keep using more and more coloring to get it dark enough. We finally get the perfect blend, and they look nice. After getting them set up on a plate, I realized something and looked to my mom and asked, why didn't we use chocolate frosting? Story 9. A kid in my school decided to play Truth or Dare, and one of the kids dared him to solve the first question in the most confusing way possible. The dude, let's just call him SK, was asked the question, 12 by 4, 48, but SK took up 80 minutes, the entire math class time before lunch, solving it. The whole whiteboard was now black with scribbles of mathematic equations and stuff, and the last thing SK said was, and therefore the answer to this unnaturally long equation is 48. When I heard about this, I cracked up. So who's the genius here? At least the kid was just having fun. But maybe he is really good at math and just wanted everyone to know. So instead of doing the simple arithmetic, he chose the complex system. Story 10. My dad is an engineer. They tend to overcomplicate everything. He once sent mom to the mechanic with pages of instructions for a professional mechanic to tell him how he wanted the tires rotated. I'll bet he paid extra that day. I also saw him play around with the settings on his computer for over an hour because it wouldn't connect to the Wi-Fi. Once he got frustrated enough, I sat down at the computer, deleted his connection, set it up again from scratch, and had him connected in probably under a minute or two. Of course, this is also the same guy, an otherwise very smart man, who once got a chainsaw for Christmas, then proceeded to climb partway up a tree and then cut the branch he was standing on. I can relate. You get caught up in the details, losing the forest in the trees. Story 11. This happens a lot in the culinary pastry world, except smart just means has a degree and doesn't relate to intelligence. I'm sure it's situational, but this has to be the only industry where a degree makes you dumber. I've seen a pastry school grad pull out a textbook and gram scale to make royal icing. There's 2 ingredients, egg whites and 10 times. Perhaps a flavoring if you're feeling slutty. Like, girl, we could pull in any soccer mom off the checkout line at Target and she could make it without a recipe. Story 12. Graphic designer here. Linked graphic with completely the wrong color when exported to PDF. Change color setting and all that? Nope, still green when it's meant to be red. This graphic is linked to other documents and it's fine there. What I should have done is made a copy of the graphic and save it as a JPEG and relink it throughout the document. 1 to 2 mins max. What did I do instead? I recreated the 64-page document. Okay. You really did go the long route to figure this one out, didn't you? Oh well, at least now you have a nice long document. Story 13. Generally, just look at whatever code I wrote 3 years ago. I once commented, sorry, please don't judge me, and then shout out the most egregious abuse of unit conversions and hideous spaghetti code, trying to turn the date into a text block, into a number block, doing math, turning it back into a string, and trying to shove it back into a Gregorian calendar. It was 80 lines of terror, and I'd probably do it again rather than working with the Java date library. Story 14. I'm a good software developer. I see variations on this theme pretty much all the time. One from last week. There were 2 radio buttons on the web page. Dude looped through all the elements of the page, then in that loop through all the elements that were inputs. Then in that loop through all the radio buttons, then checked the name, then checked if they were selected, then checked if they were not selected, then determined if they were selected, do one thing, then determined if they were not selected, do another thing. When all he had to do is A, selected, do this, otherwise do that. Okay, you definitely lost me there. I hope the dude knew what he was doing and didn't tie himself up in mental jargon loops. Story 15. I had a buddy in high school who was a fantastic piano player. He could play anything by ear after hearing it once, which is why it surprised me that during band class he kept asking about the key signatures in music we were reading for the first time. For those of you who can't read sheet music, a key signature is like a formatting guide for the piece. It turns out that instead of reading key signatures like everyone else, he would count the number of sharps, flats in the key signature and then compare that number to the circle of fifths, which he had memorized. This usually took him a while, so he'd ask me because I could read them faster. Story 16. I was living with my then boyfriend and his father, both with degrees in engineering and all that. One day, the big chest freezer packs in, after being neglected for years and building up tons of ice. None of this self-defrosting luxury back then. Once all this started to defrost, there was a problem. Where to put the big lumps of ice? I am a fairly practical type, so I suggested throwing it in the garden and the problem will solve itself as the temperature was mild. This was met with horrified expressions of what would the neighbors think. So next, I suggested the bathtub, idea which was also scoffed by these supreme beings. After that, I gave up and watched quite bemused as these supposedly intelligent guys got out black bin liners and put the melting ice in and threw them out to the wheelie bin. I don't know. I just feel like there could have been a simpler solution here. Oh no, they call themselves engineers, but they couldn't figure this one out in a practical, common sense, easy way? Weird, to say the least. Story 17. I set up an experiment with my ex-roommate when I was moving out. She was needing to grab something off a shelf in the garage so I could move something that was mine. I placed a ladder right next to the shelf, hoping that she would use it and it'd be easy for her to find. Her brother bet that she'd actually get a chair from the kitchen. My brother bet she'd get my step stool from my car outside. She knew it was there because she put it there. She actually went and got a little milk crate from her bedroom at the other end of the house to use as a step stool. Nobody saw that coming. Story 18. It was on Reddit, but I don't know how to find it. This person was talking about Cards Against Humanity and how they included a bonus card in the edition they got. But it was bullshit because that card was bent. So everyone knew exactly what card it was when drawn because it had a big frickin' crease in it. Then someone replied, just bend all the cards. And I remember thinking, this genius mother frick, and I still laugh when I think about it. Story 19. I heard about a math professor who asked his students to solve the following. Take a vinyl record that has a diameter of 10 inches. Pretend that there is no label or center hole, so the needle can travel the entire distance from the edge to the center, for simplicity. The spiral groove is 0.04 millimeters wide with a gap of 0.01 millimeters between each loop. Calculate the distance the needle travels when playing one full side of the record. The answer is 5 inches. I often wonder if some of these difficult, long-winded mathematical calculations are actually really simple but made to look hard. I'm terrible at math, but maybe if someone taught me the true simplicity of it, I might learn more easily. I'm sure a lot of kids feel that way too. Story 20. I had to troubleshoot a particular robot that was programmed by some PLC programmers I know to be brilliant, but evidently they had never had formal training in kinematics or robotics. Instead of using a very simple linear transformation, they had invented their own method that used thousands of lines of incredibly complex code. It must have taken them several months to code. Can't recall exactly, but I lived with engineering students. They tried to be smart asses about every little stupid thing without actually solving the issue at hand. Story 21. This happened today, but I'm not that smart anyways. I am a judge for an event and have to tally points. All week I've been adding the points and they've been in the 80s and 90s out of 100. Today I realized it'd be easy to subtract the points missed. Really happy I figured that on the last day. Story 22. I was working with a team that had identified and graphed the priority for about 20 different issues. All 20 were in the highest priority quadrant, but we only had capacity to solve 10 issues. Our leader came in, saw the graph on the wall, and drove a line across the middle of it. Now you have high and low priority. That right there is the reason why he is a leader. Take me to your leader. I'm not sure what you're talking about here, but I hope it works, whatever it is. Story 23. My mom makes cakes for friends and coworkers. I help with decorations. One cake was supposed to have a tree drawn on it in icing, but Mom didn't have brown food coloring. We spent over an hour trying different color mixes before settling on orange with a little black. The next day, after delivering the cake, we realized that we could have used chocolate icing or just mixed all the colors together. Everyone figures that out around age 5. Story 24. I knew a guy while in the Air Force who tested with an IQ of 160. He was trying to figure out a math problem that basically amounted to A plus B equals B plus A. But since he couldn't believe the solution would be that simple, he spent the next 2 months obsessing over finding a different solution. I could honestly believe this. He was probably in some super technical sort of MOS, and people in those fields tend to overthink everything because the equipment they work with forces them to do so. I think people like that are a bit brainwashed or something. It's like they're more machine than human. That's how they're trained. Being human should be simple solutions to day-to-day problems. Story 25. Hopefully it's not narcissistic to use myself, but I once coded a program to scrape eBay and send me text alerts whenever an item I wanted was available for under a certain price. Deployed it on a server so it was running at all times. Was so proud of myself until I remembered eBay has that functionality built in, and all you have to do is click a few buttons. Story 26. An electrical engineer once called for assistance because his PC would not power on. It was busy that day and he was getting pissy that no one had been over 20 minutes later. I arrived shortly and saw that he had kicked the power cable from the surge protector, plugged it in, his face turned red and he thanked me. Time to get a slice of humble pie here. Who has the largest brain in this equation, I wonder? Story 27. My roommate spilled some detergent on the washer lid. It was open and upright, so it went inside the bottom bent edge portion of the lid. He was using a small spoon to scoop it up and put it to the clothes. I told him to take one of the dirty cloths, wipe it off, and put the cloth back. He stared at me and burst out laughing. Story 28. I've seen someone build an extremely sophisticated Excel spreadsheet for time management to stop them from procrastinating. I'm talking Marcos, the ability to handle complex dependency trees, sophisticated algorithms for assigning priority to different tasks. It took hours and hours to produce, and generally only spat out that the next task was the obvious one given 5 seconds of thought. This person was me. Story 29. My boss is super ADD or something. It took him a week to sort out stock balances. It was like 50 pieces. And he kept moving it around and sorting it in different ways. It was really confusing. The dude is a freaking smart guy, though. He's just not very effective at his job. Intelligence is not a black and white thing. There are different levels and kinds of intelligence. I always think the most intelligent people are the ones who know how to simplify things and make them more practical. Story 30. I have a hobby of working on cars, and as a self-proclaimed smart person, sometimes it is just more time efficient to go through a complicated solution than to figure out a simpler one. I've saved a lot of time working on stuff by just going for what comes to mind first. Story 31. This happened to me, 24, like a month or two ago. Was at work on my phone and my coworker, 58, asked me to do some division. Started doing long division on a piece of paper. My coworker looked over and asked me why I didn't just use the calculator on my phone. I've never felt like such an idiot before. She, however, found it to be hilarious. I think it's better to learn to do it in your head or on paper first rather than rely on your phone or a calculator. Keep your brain active. Your friend is just choosing the easy approach. It's not the most intelligent one, though. It makes you lazy. Story 32. I don't remember the equation, but I once solved a math problem in high school in such a complicated manner that even my teacher was baffled. It took me nearly 1 hour to do that one question. I eventually gave up and asked him how to solve it. He showed me a much easier way, and I was able to redo the equation in like 2 minutes. Story 33. In robotics, to map between 2 frames of reference, there are standard methods. Crack open any intro to kinematics, robotics, or linear algebra textbook, and it's right there, taking up about half a page. T equals P. It is literally a single line of code once you calculate T, and T only takes about 12 simple lines of code. I guess once you know the system, it makes everything much more simple and easy to understand. If only more teachers knew this. Story 34. Once tried using a set of batteries to power a DC to AC inverter to power an AC motor to power a bike. Yeah, didn't work. Motor drew too many watts for the inverter. You may wonder why I didn't just use a DC motor, and honestly, I wonder that too. Story 35. I do the election statistics for the city I live in. I can do them in my head, perfect double check by peers per regulation. I need an abacus to do basic addition and subtraction. I'm too dyslexic to use a calculator for anything that requires more than 3 variables. Edit. The city has 100,000 plus people in it. Well, as long as you're getting the figures right, good for you. That's great. It's a skill that not everybody has. Story 36. Knew a guy whose car key unlock button failed to unlock his driver's side door. He would just hit it twice and go in the passenger side, reach over and unlock the driver's side door, then go around and get in. I pointed out that he could just use the key to open the door, and he had a moment of self-doubt before laughing at himself. Story 37. My uncle has a boat, and one day it stopped working. After testing everything, he started freaking out about how shitty his boat is and how much money he wasted. It was out of gas. That's hilarious. Your uncle is a bit of a spoiled brat, but I get the point. You spend money, you want things to work. But then you find it's just some silly thing and you wasted all that time and energy getting upset over nothing. Story 38. Call maintenance in to do it for them. I worked in maintenance in a hospital. ER doctor called me in at 2 in the morning to change the batteries in his pager. Story 39. An engineer was tasked with drawing an egg Pictionary. He started with the chicken. Story 40. Mark Zuckerberg creating Facebook so he could interact with humans. Mark Zuckerberg creating Facebook so he could interact with collect data on humans. Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. I thought he was an android anyways. He looks like one. A kind of Star Trek Data type of thing. Story 41. I was drawing one day and I messed up, but instead of erasing, I cut out the mistake with scissors. So what happened next? Did your project work out or did you just make a mess of it? Story 42. Anyone ever watched Nathan for You? Story 43. Countdown's numbers game. Click on one of the videos on the screen now, or Karen will sue you.